Hello and welcome to episode 162 of the Unsecurity podcast. With me today is Evan Francine. Evan, how are you doing?
Doing well, man. It's good to be here.
Yeah, and since I didn't introduce myself, I'm Brad, obviously. What are you going to do?
Right.
It's been a busy week. It's been nuts. I'm not going to lie. I've been in meetings back to back all morning today leading into this, so I'll blame that.
Yeah.
How are you doing, Evan?
I'm down here. I'm doing well, man. I'm down here in Mexico. John Harmon's here, the FRSecure president, and a few other people at a house of 7. And like we were talking before the show started, it's not like the work goes away. You come back from doing, we did some scuba diving, and you come back from scuba diving, and there's 50 emails. So,
well,
trying to keep up.
You guys are better. Yeah, you're better off than we are. It was -6 with a wind chill of -20 at 8 this morning. So, I'm going to guess I'm a little jealous.
Well, that's one of the good things about your work environment. I think there's some work environments where it's more conducive for work, and then there's others where it's just like, in that cold, it's just like, for me, it's, you think like a machine, right? It has to work harder to get going in the cold. Mm-hmm. When you're in the warmth, it doesn't take as much to get going. You kind of get up and you're ready to go.
I will say, days like this make me very happy to work remote, because going into the office when it's that cold out is no fun.
No, not at all. Not at all. And, speaking of busy, in our day-to-day work that we're always doing, we've got a couple of classes starting. The CVC cert class kicks off on Tuesday, and, have a lot of work to do there. And then we have the CISP mentor program that was just announced. Yesterday.
Enrollment, just opened up yesterday. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is I think we've got a couple extra, teachers this year. I think, we might spread the load even more, hopefully.
That's nice. Yeah, with 3, oh my gosh, that was such a huge difference. So I can't believe this will be my 6th year doing it.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. And when you think about it, overall, it's 12 years.
Yeah.
It's nuts. No wonder my face looks so old. I am.
Oh, yeah, there you go. I had 2 people reach out for endorsement this week because they passed. So that's awesome. It always makes you feel like you do wonder sometimes, right? Is it worth it? Are people getting value out of it? And so getting that confirmation that's what keeps you going.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the gift that keeps giving throughout the year, and that is what makes it worthwhile.
Right. We're all volunteering to do it. We're not getting paid. We're not charging anything for it. We're giving up 2 hours plus, 2 nights a week. So it's worthwhile.
Absolutely. And I would encourage anybody who's out there who's thought about, teaching others or mentoring others. It's easy to make excuses on why you wouldn't, like, I'm not good enough, or I don't have enough time, or whatever reason you come up with. But, the new generations need the mentoring, right?
Yeah.
So sharing your time, you don't have, what you get back for it is, I guess a feeling that's really hard to describe, but, it's not about money all the time.
No. And that's one of the things I wish I'd had, is somebody that could have, helped guide me a little bit and given me that, that knowledge that they've learned. So I'm happy to be able to do that for others.
For sure. So where would people email if they were interested in the CISP mentor program? Would they just email info at FRSecure.com?
No, it's is it CISP mentor at FRSecure?
Okay.
Yeah, CISP mentor at FRSecure.com. I think would be the best. Brandon watches that one pretty closely.
Good. Yeah, I'm excited. You'll hear us talking about that in future episodes as well. We're going to keep pushing it.
Yep.
It's free, no strings attached. It will always be free.
Yep. Yeah, I think the material is what it is. I think the biggest value is those life lessons and tips and tricks, right? We're not going to just read out of the book. Anybody could do that. So at least that's the feedback I've gotten.
Well, and in terms of the CVCISO certification, we're writing the book.
Yeah,
Just kind of weird.
I am still going to take that without taking the class just to see.
Well, and you and I we still owe a book anyway, right? So we'll take the
Yeah.
notes from that class and
That's true.
we'll be good to go.
Yeah. Too bad work has gotten so crazy. I haven't been able to get all that done. Life happens. Oh well. All right. So today we're going to talk whitelisting. Yeehaw. So what is white?
Now.
Oh, you're right. Oh my gosh.
No,
Block that
it's all
out.
good, man.
Edit it out.
No.
It was funny. I have the notes up, and it's been, it's hard to change those habits. You just,
Well, that's
if
it.
you're not
right?
thinking about it.
We always kind of just took that for granted. We didn't realize that anybody would be offended by using the word whitelist versus blacklist.
Yeah.
And
I
I
can't
think
believe I
today
flipped on that
people
one.
no, don't worry about it, man. People are more sensitive to that because I catch myself doing the same thing. I've used the word whitelist a billion times over my career. I've used the word allow list much less. So I'm also in a transition.
Yeah, it's been less than a year really that's been a thing. So we'll get there. Apologies. So allow listing and then block listing. So we're going to talk allow listing. From a high level, what is that? Well, allow listing is default deny, right? We're only going to allow traffic that we know is legitimate and required for business use. Blocklisting is we're going to allow everything, but then block the things we know are malicious. So leaves it a lot more open. Allow listing is the most secure way you can, protect your network. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and I'd even go further to say that it's the only way to configure a network. I think, back in the earlier days when things were much less complicated, the wisdom here is complexity is the worst enemy of security. So back when things
Right.
were much less complicated, take a firewall for instance, it was common for us to do allow listing. We would only permit
Sure.
ingress, right, from the internet or from a less secure network through the firewall, but also egress.
Well, if you think about it, back in the day, what did you have? You had DNS, email, and web traffic for the most part. Maybe you had FTP or a couple of others, but you didn't have all the cloud services and everything running on these weird ports and all that we are dealing with today. So yeah, it was a lot easier to do it.
Right. And in terms of, it's the only way to secure things. The reason why, or in my opinion, even to run things, it's the right way to do it. A firewall, the purpose of a firewall, for instance, is to block traffic that's not permitted. Right?
Correct.
Well, if you want that thing to run the way it's capable of running, you would only allow what's specifically permitted. And I know it's a lot of work, and the more
Right.
complicated your network is, the more work it's going to be. But we do get paid to do this.
Right. Well, and I think one of the big issues that we see is, well, how are we going to do that, right? You're going to have to monitor for a long time and sort through a lot of stuff to see what's needed or not needed, or you start over. And neither of those is really very appealing.
No, and it starts whenever you're shifting, from one strategy, maybe it's a block list strategy to an allow list strategy. You're going to need to do a lot of planning.
Oh yeah.
And I would start with what my mission critical applications are. So if you don't know that, what your mission critical applications are, well then before you're ready to do allow listing, go figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there are ways to start that transition with certain things to make it easier, right? Like I would only allow DNS traffic from my DNS servers, my point of truth. I don't want DNS traffic from endpoints going to the internet. Why is that? Well, that's a payload method for attackers. They'll send a DNS query out and get the result. In that return is the payload, or where to go to get that payload. And nobody blocks DNS. It's a legitimate protocol, right? So if your Active Directory is set up to look to your domain controllers, which by default it is and should be, well, why would they need to go to the internet for DNS? They don't.
Well, sadly, you've got some, core applications that are hard coded to go to, external DNS or something. Yeah. Sometimes there's those legitimate reasons. But if you start with those core applications, at least I can start allow listing those core applications. So they can't talk to anything else except for what's specifically permitted. Because we had the same thing happen with SolarWinds.
Yep.
Right? As a great example, SolarWinds was able to be controlled by the attackers with command and control because there was no egress filtering in a lot of these places. There was no allow listing. So your core application could talk back to an attacker, the bad people, and continue to propagate. Whereas, like the IRS, for instance, doesn't matter how much you like them or not, they actually had allow listing built egress from the firewall, and it wasn't able to propagate there.
Yeah.
That's one example of many, many.
And we just had another one drop earlier this week, Tuesday. Zoho's Manage Engine, Desktop Central, and Desktop Central MSPs have a bug that allows an authentication bypass that would allow to read unauthorized data and or write an arbitrary zip file to the server. Well, why are they open to the internet? Do you need those servers to be able to? I mean, this is an unauthenticated way they're going to drop a zip. That sounds bad.
Well, and this is one of the frustrations for me too, is because ever since the beginning of firewalls, right, 30, 40, I don't know how many years ago, this function has always been there, right? Being able to block everything, only allow the things that are specifically required for the functionality of a system or an application or whatever. And had you followed that, and had we stuck to the way firewalls were designed to be run, we wouldn't be in this position we're in today. But at some point, things got so out of hand, so complicated, so many firewalls that people didn't understand how to configure correctly, that now it's become acceptable to do block lists versus allow lists. And now there's this talk of, well, how do we get back to that? Well, in some cases, you start over, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is, honestly, over time, block listing is more cumbersome. Right? Like, your allow listing should be relatively small, as opposed to, oh, I got to block this IP, now I got to block this group, and now I got to do this, and I got to, right? Block listing is more work long term.
I agree. It's more work short term to get there, to get to the allow list, because you haven't been doing that for a while. So it's a lot. But here's another thing about security. One of the most valuable things in security is intimately knowing what it is I'm trying to secure, knowing how it operates, knowing how it sounds, knowing how, all that. If I know that really well, then I'll notice these deviations, or I'll be able to only allow it to do the things it's supposed to do. We've gotten so far away. I think most organizations have no idea what their network looks like, have no idea what applications are running on their network. And so there's all sorts of communications that are happening constantly on the network that they don't even know.
It's rare. Well, when we do the assessments, I don't know the exact, I'm going to guess maybe 50-50 if they have a network diagram or not. And then if they do, then it's what I would consider sufficient. And I almost never see it. Right. Yeah, 50% may have a good network diagram. And it's probably less than 10% for data flow. People just don't know what's there. And, what's funny, so part of this was where this came up from is our marketing team is asking Eric, who we had on, and myself and some others for the content, about, well, is there a way we could put together some how-tos to help people with allow listing? And, I just kind of chuckled, and Eric had a great point. And, he kind of laughed and explained it to him. He's like, well, how many different manufacturers are there out there? How many different models do they have? You're looking at probably, then you're looking at web application firewalls on top of that, on top of your actual firewalls to the internet. You could be looking at 200 plus different ways to allow that you need to configure this stuff, like different interfaces, different commands. It's daunting. We're like, no, there's not a way we can do it. Those suppliers have those. Oh, go ahead.
No, you have to start with an asset inventory. I mean,
right.
So you have to know what all those suppliers are, and once you've got your asset inventory, then start looking for duplications, things that, because many organizations will have multiple applications or multiple devices that do the same function, and they didn't realize that they had, the overlapping coverage. So do an asset inventory, a detailed asset inventory, because you're going to need it anyway at some point. It's the core of so much of this. Simplify everywhere that you can, including your architecture, right? So having multiple layers, it may seem like it's cool to have multiple layers of, firewalls or web application firewalling, but in actuality, it's worse because it's more opportunity for a mistake. It's more complicated.
Absolutely.
Simplifies everything you can.
Yeah, and doing it correctly up front does, like you said, it takes more time. It's more, labor intensive. But I've always been of the case, like, I'm going to take the time to do it right the first time, because that's going to save countless hours down the road. And you see it over and over and over again. It's the basics. Just do it right the first time. I don't care if it takes me 8 hours instead of 2. That 6 hours is going to be made up, exponentially over the next years or a couple years.
In what other occupation or profession do you not do things right because it's too much work?
Right. Well, and I think
if I'm in
part
construction, should I cut corners because it's too much work? If I have to reinforce that wall, or dentistry, or a doctor, or a lawyer, or it's just not acceptable.
No, it's not. But I think the problem is that you don't get business buy-in. So they're like, you may want to do it the right way, but it's not within the business's, time frame, or they just want to get it done. They don't want to deal with the pain of doing it correctly and having to kind of troubleshoot to get it going. So it's like, well, what am I going to do? So I think that's a big problem too.
Well, but I think a lot of times we use that as an excuse too, right? It's, well, management doesn't give me buy-in. Well, try communicating better.
Right. Well, and I'm not saying that is valid excuse. I'm just saying that you're right. That is, I think that's what we hear, right? They're like, well, can't do it. Management won't let me, and they cut corners rather than, like you just said, pushing and doing it right.
Right. Yeah. So, that's the frustrating part is, because you do hear a lot of excuses on why we don't do allow listing or why we don't have an asset inventory. We don't have an asset inventory because we don't have time to do it. You don't, and where that makes zero sense is I don't have time to understand what it is I'm trying to protect.
Right.
What are you?
Right.
What are you doing?
I agree. Well, and that's the other thing. Well, the IR plan, I heard this was an exact quote. Well, this IR plan is too long. That's unrealistic. I'm like, no. Yeah, there's things we can take out that aren't relevant to you if you're not, we have everything in our template, including HIPAA and some other stuff that maybe isn't relevant. Okay, take that out. But if you're going to take a 40-page document and drop it down to 10 pages, what good is that going to do you?
Right. Yeah, and then that, it leads to that easy button syndrome, right? To where, allow listing is really hard, but hey, there's this zero trust thing, and it's like, what do you think zero trust is?
Right. Right. Well, and I think a lot of it too is like you said, communication and setting expectations. Right. Hey, we need to do this, and it's going to take me, 12 hours versus hey, we can do that this way, and it's going to be two. Start with being realistic about, with that communication of, here's what we need to do, here's why we need to do it, and here's how much time it's going to take to do it correctly, and here's what we've saved by doing it correctly.
Right. There's no other way. I mean, there's no other way. It's funny, we did a security shit show, on it's blank or get off the pot, right? And it's the point is, if you're going to do security, then do it right. If you're not going to do security right, then you're not doing security.
Right. Absolutely.
You're half-assing it, and the sad thing is then we have this false sense of security, which is almost worse, because we think, oh, well, we've got a security staff of X number of whatever people, and we've got all this technology, so we must be secure, right? We have a big budget. But no, you've made it worse because you haven't used it correctly.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Before this, I was on a call with the insurance broker, and they had some things that they're like, hey, these are the things you have to look for. And actually, I agreed with them. I thought it was a really good slide. But we were talking, and it was like, incident response, and I was like, I can't tell you how many times we've seen people spend X number of dollars, brag about it, but not know what they have. It's about the basics. And I told him, I was like, we talk about it on the podcast. We've been doing it for 3 years, and we talk about it every single week. People still aren't doing it. It's been, 20 years, and they're still missing it. And I'm with you. I don't get it.
Well, and we talked about this last night too. I think one of the reasons, when you think about what motivates people, it's almost like, a lot of people have heard of Pavlov's, study of dogs, right? On what motivates them. And so it's either a reward, food, something good for them, something they value, or it's pain. Right. I think a lot of times we've lacked accountability so much in our industry that there's not enough pain or not enough reward for them to do things the right way. So, as a business owner, I don't care.
I think that's a good point. Maybe part of it is the fear of what will happen if you do it wrong, right? If you take that extra time and you don't meet a deadline, maybe you get reprimanded or you get let go. So people take the easy way, right? Hey, this will work. They're happy. Less work for me. I don't have to worry about my job. Right. Versus, and it goes back to the communication and setting those expectations up front with what this means.
Right, and the frustrating part, because we're purists, right? I mean, we know how security works so well that we see that there's only one way to do it, because that's true. If the goal is to manage risk, well, then you have to do these things. Otherwise, you just continue to spend money and, ineffective, whatever. But, we have a long ways to go, I think, in getting over the hump that this is the way you do security. Yeah.
Well, and, I'm going to go back to it for a third time. It's communication, right? Because I just lost my train of thought, too. Darn it, I had a really good point.
Well, that's all right, man.
I was going to say, security, we have to balance with work, right? With business. We can't be a detriment to the organization if you're in security. So there is always that balance. But whatever the organization's risk tolerance is, do it correctly. Don't shortcut what you're allowed to do. Right?
Well, and the frustrating thing, one of the lies that we've told for years and years is that there's no ROI in security.
Oh my gosh, I hate that.
And that's such a lie, because there is an ROI, right? To just take one, I'll give you one example. Complexity is the worst enemy of security, right? It makes our job much more difficult. In a typical organization, you might be able to save a few $100,000, maybe millions of dollars, by removing duplicate technology or simplifying, parts of the business. So not only does the business then become more efficient because there's less steps to follow, it also makes it more secure for us, and we just saved a whole bunch of money because we're not pissing away on software.
I mean, a great example, was a place that had a web filter application at the edge. They had endpoint protection, and then they had a data loss prevention device at the edge. So they had 3 different solutions, and I found a single solution that put the web filter, the DLP on the endpoint. So it didn't even matter if they were traveling off-site; they still were required, with our policies. I mean, that saved probably, $75,000.
Right, there you go.
And it made it easier for management. It's all in one place. I don't have to log in 3 different places to do one thing.
Right.
So also handled.
That's a perfect example, man. You should write that up as a case study because that's exactly.
Yeah. Well, and it also handled endpoint encryption, right? So we took care of that as well. So there are solutions out there.
Right, and you hear people, and another excuse I hear a lot, or, we don't need to do, allow listing because we're securing the endpoint with whatever, right? Maybe you're doing some allow listing on the endpoint, or whatever technology you're using, and good for you, but that doesn't mean you don't do these other things, right? You don't allow list on the network because there are ways around your endpoint protection. It's about doing things right. It's like if you give me a tool, why would I use the tool, half-ass? Why would, give me a hammer? Why would I start slapping things with the hammer sideways?
Right.
Or upside down, trying to hit it with the handle. I mean, it's a hammer. Use it right.
Yep.
So that's the frustration, man.
And,
you bought it.
Right. Well, and going back to my example, it wasn't just hey, we should do this. It was, here's why we should do it. Here's, it's going to simplify everything. Right? We have one management, one pane of glass. We're spending X amount per year on these on the combination of these 3 things. This one is going to cost this much. So there's your savings of this much. Right? So much of this comes down to communication and setting those expectations.
Right. And I get if moving from your approach of block listing today to moving to allow listing, if that's going to be, because no 2 organizations are the same, if that's going to be a huge project, then spread it out over time so it's not so painful. Mm-hmm. This is a progression. It's a maturity, right? It's not flip a switch. So it's actually better to do it that way if you can be disciplined enough, because then it becomes part of your culture and the way you do business, versus I did it once and then usually find that it gets sideways again later. Yeah. Maybe start with one subnet or one business unit, right? You don't have to eat the elephant in one bite. You can't do that. So find a test group, start with them. Obviously anytime I had a test group, they liked it because I was super responsive, because I wanted them to have a good experience so they could talk to their peers and be like, oh my gosh, this was great, right? So let them know, hey, you're going to be a test group, but you've got priority if you have an issue, because I want to make it work. You'd be surprised. People are like, oh, cool, I got a direct line. Right, and I think that's another reason why it's important to do planning. Plan this out. Make estimations, understand how complex your network is, how many applications are running, all those things. If you don't have answers to that, get those answers first, and you might have to have plans for that as well. But eventually you get to a point where you've got this allow listing project plan, and, depending on the timeline, if the timeline is 2 years, for instance, right, we're really going to make a commitment over the long period or the long haul, prioritize, which assets or which rules you're going to work on first, which networks you're going to work on, and eventually you'll get through the entire list. Or you may just have like we do this with guest networks, you may have just a network that's just going to be run free, like you. Yeah. We're going to isolate those folks.
Yeah, exactly. We'll put the very basic protections in place, and that's it. Yep. All right. Well, good conversation. Hopefully that helps people. We just have one news article today. I mentioned the managed engine issue. That's going to be interesting to watch how that plays out. But Uh, Off of dark reading, Europol shuts down popular cyber criminal VPN service. So they shut down VPNLab on January 17th. It's like it was Germany, Canada, the Netherlands, Czech Republic, France, Hungary, Latvia, Ukraine, and the United States, and the United Kingdom. So 15 servers hosting VPNLab service. So double VPN. Yeah, that's good. It's nice to see.
Yeah, it is nice to see. The collaboration between the different countries, I think, is a good thing. And in terms of the disruption to the business, the criminals' business, because it is a business for them, it's minimal. We find that a lot of these, criminal organizations actually have better incident response and disaster recovery plans than we do in the private sector. So they anticipate things like this and reroute their traffic somewhere else. What I'm more excited about is the data that they captured.
Yeah. So interesting. It says, as a result of the investigation, more than 100 businesses have been identified as at risk. Law enforcement is working directly with those potential victims to mitigate their exposure. So hopefully they get it. That's 100 businesses that don't have this happen to them.
I agree. And maybe, I'm sure there's good information here as well in tracing back to, potential sources, potential attack sources.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see, some of the full details whenever that gets released, some of the data around that.
Yeah. And on those attack resources, I hope they actually hold them accountable. 14 months of probation isn't going to cut it.
No. All right, so we'll wrap it up. Great conversation, Evan. Do you have any shout-outs?
I'm going to give shout-outs to people you don't know, but the Mexican people I run into down here, they amaze me. They're inspiring because it's different. They have such a great work ethic. They're so content with what they have.
Very different culture.
Yeah, there's no entitlement, and you come here and you're like, you're just a good person. I've run into that all over this week, so I'm just going to give a shout out to Mexican people, I guess.
Nice. I'm a little self-serving here, but I'll shout out to our leadership team. And we meet every Monday. You've got people from every different group in the organization, obviously competing interests and stuff, and just seeing how well everybody works together. There's no animosity. Like, it's awesome. So much fun to do that. And it goes up a level to the executive leadership and all the way down. It's just it's so great to trust the people that you work with.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it's definitely something not to take for granted. And if you've come from a place where that didn't exist, which sadly is too many places, and then you come into a place like this, we hear it all the time. When does the other shoe drop? I'm like, we only wear one. We only wear one shoe around here. Have you seen us?
Yeah, right. You're lucky if we have shoes.
Yeah, we need shoes.
So, all right. Well, great episode. We'll talk to everyone again next week.